generative AI in marketing. So this is a relatively new set of technologies that I suppose all of you have used, and there's a lot of open questions about how to use them for learning, and I will also discuss some of the ideas I have concerning that, and then we'll discuss a little bit about the history of this technology, and then its applications in marketing as well. So what is generative AI? So these are systems that generate new content, including text, images, code, music, or videos. Different modalities can now be generated automatically. I'm sure you have tried. Most commonly, we now use ChatGPT to generate text, but that kind of uh, model also now supports pictures and videos. So they used to be just LLMs or LMs, language models and large language models. Um, but well, that generated text. But then now we also use terms like foundation model and fusion model to indicate that these models can also produce or generate other modalities of content. But the idea is that you control the output using natural language. So these technologies sort of stem for the research tradition of natural language processing, or NLP, which started from quite simplistic rule-based approaches to computationally try and understand language and process language at large scale, like documents, keyword search, and things like that. So it is actually very, very recent that we can now say that these models exhibit actually a good level of understanding human language. So that was the key, because this understanding of natural language was sort of the holy grail or the problem the models were not able to understand. Just a few years ago, they could not understand at all what the prompts given to them, unless they were very structured, the prompts. So this limited in how you use the models, but also they were not able to produce fluent and sort of relevant content addressing the user's query. So it was quite magical that all of a sudden we had models, especially GPT-3, and then ChatGPT really revolutionized this field. And it's sort of, even to me, I was working at QCRI, so Qatar Computing Research at the time, and I had used a lot of similar technologies, and it was maybe just 6 months ago or 6 months before ChatGPT was launched. I was again testing it for kind of our system purposes, if we could incorporate it in our data-driven persona system, like this kind of automatic text generation, but it was complete gibberish. So I wrote to my boss that this will never happen, and there's so much effort put into this text generation, but it's so weak that you really cannot use. And then, yeah, maybe a year from that, ChatGPT came out, and the rest is sort of history. Totally transformed NLP, and now it's like transforming a lot of knowledge work and like human activity. So it's very exciting, but it comes from a long tradition of research. So this started in the late 40s already, research on NLP, and then the first chatbot, I believe this is the first chatbot, 1966, Eliza, is a therapy chatbot that was rule-based and sort of did what ChatGPT does now, but using simple keywords and trying to detect like keywords. So rule-based systems, their limitation is always that the variety in human language exceeds any rule. In rule-based system, you have to write a rule for every case. So if a person writes hello, you need to have a rule that responds. But if they write hey, or all the variations of human language, or whatever they type, you need to have a rule that sort of covers that case, or then the bot doesn't know how to do. So that's one of the ideas of machine learning, that we sort of try to get rid of such rules and learn a model that can handle all possible cases, even cases that we haven't seen before. So if you write a new word to ChatGPT, it's still able to respond in some way. And it's able to generate also new words, which is quite remarkable, right? It can generate new words that don't exist, so they are not part of the training material or training data of the model. But it's able to do that because it has an understanding of language, so it can split words into shorter stems or partial words, and then it understands that this partial word could be combined with another part to create a completely new word that it hasn't seen. So this is quite astonishing. And some people even in the AI industry are sort of downplaying this and saying that LLMs are just probabilistic text generations and they cannot think really and they are not conscious. And those are actually kind of true when it comes to consciousness and real AI. So it is still mimicry of human intelligence, but that's what artificial intelligence is about, right? So the word artificial means that you are mimicking human intelligence. So for that purpose, these models, generative AI models, are really good, and they're good at a level where we can apply them for actual marketing tasks. So if you remember other forms of AI we have discussed, or machine learning, let's say applied machine learning. So we had classification, for example, classification, regression, clustering. So the first two are supervised machine learning approaches where we deal with labeled data. And then clustering is an example of unsupervised machine learning where we deal with unlabeled data. So these are supervised and unsupervised methods are so-called classical AI approaches. So we were talking about AI when we were talking about AI, for example, in 2017, these were the kind of the types of model we were referring to. And these generative capabilities that are now coming up, for some people, these are their first touch point to so-called AI. They did not know about this supervised, unsupervised, etc. So they now think AI means the same as generative AI, but of course we know that's not the case. So yeah, it's a clear distinction between the classical and generative AI, and like how it fits with this is that it's generation and not about this other. So we would still use for regression task a regression model. It does better than generative AI. Generative AI really cannot do regression, right? It can do regression, but it does it by using regression model. So if you ask ChatGPT to do regression, it will literally build a regression model. So it uses classical AI. The same if you ask it to do clustering, it uses clustering algorithm. So that AI is actually relying on classical AI to get the job done. So yeah, they generate different modalities as I mentioned there. So text, audio, images, video, and this is hugely potential, especially for marketing, right? So when you think about what areas of marketing are affected by these modalities, it's pretty much everything. Well, content marketing, first of all. Content marketing, in content marketing, content is the key, and content is generated in all these modalities in different social media platforms. So becomes also now a social media marketing tool, because it can be used to generate posts and in textual format, and those can even be customized per platform. So because different platforms like X, Facebook, Instagram have kind of different style in terms of using hashtags and post lengths and so on. So actually, we did a research paper that tested this, and we noticed that if you ask ChatGPT or these GPT models to generate a tweet versus a Facebook post, it will produce different content. So it has some kind of understanding of what typical Twitter or X content is versus typical Facebook content, which is really, really interesting. And we are now quickly going into video, which is a bit more challenging modality because it requires more processing power, and there are a lot more like images, a lot more frames needed. So it's a little bit complex, but the technology is quickly getting there, and it's it's um, it's at an amazing pace. Um, it's happening also music, audio, speech. Totally, speech is now sort of resolved, so can generate AI speech. Like for example, the Google Notebook ML can generate a podcast from each material. I think Cypherbot also has that implemented now. Our engineer said he is implementing that, so all the learning materials can be transformed into podcasts where two AIs are talking about the content, and they're doing it in a very fluent manner. And yeah, music, creation of music, by providing sort of an example or asking just generate a song that's similar to style of AC/DC or some other Taylor Swift, and then AI can write the lyrics, and it can actually also write the melody for the song. So it's quite remarkable, this transformation. We'll discuss some of the limitations also, because just because we can generate some content doesn't mean that content is high quality or successful. Some cases it is, but in other cases it will not be good enough. So Olga is asking about song recognition. So song recognition is in Shazam, for example, that's a part of the earlier. So that's a classical AI, and that's a classification problem, right? So that Shazam has a database of kind of like all the songs, or very very big catalog of songs, and it's what it's doing, it's from your microphone, it's listening to a sample of a song, so that song is transformed. Remember, everything needs to go to numerical format, so that for that audio sample that you're recording via Shazam is transformed into some future representation, so a series of numbers. Probably it is an embedding, so a vector, so a series of numbers, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. Something depends a little bit on how that vector is configured, how many dimensions and what is like the coding scheme, but maybe 300, 3000 dimensions, so that many digits it has. So it has a similar vector of all the songs it has. So it's then just comparing, and that's quite quick to compare. If you have two strings and you compare which has the biggest match. So you will quickly actually be able to rotate millions of songs. That's why it's working so fast. So it's taking the audio, transforming it to numbers, and just comparing it to the other. And once it finds the closest match, it returns that. So it's sort of like classification, or you could even call it just data extraction problem or mapping problem. Okay, so then yeah, so here's another slide. So it's kind of a meme about generative AI. So AI and generative AI are not the same, as we kind of understand these concepts, even though in now it's starting to be that some people who talk about AI are referring to generative AI. It's just kind of, these concepts here on the left side and the right side are like different ways of understanding AI, and this meme is about that, PyTorch is a library for running deep learning, then XGBoost, the famous algorithm that can do classification, regression, and so on. The currently, kind of default or best algorithm according to some ML pipeline, model registry, model training, cross-validation. A lot of the stuff here you have heard about in this course, and you should know a lot of these concepts after completing. A lot of them are production related, so ML ops and model deployment and monitoring, so on. It's coming in your future learning cycle, ML in production, which is after next week's learning cycle. But yeah, so now we have AI powered groundbreaking game killer. So this is talking about like how it's hype now about the AI, and so supposedly you don't need to know about anything, about the classical AI or how it actually works and implemented. It's enough that you know that okay, I can type something to ChatGPT and now I'm an AI developer. So it's just a meme about that. It's interesting. We'll sort of return to this topic, this idea in another slide. So a little bit of the history, a few papers that have been like are groundbreaking. So these generative adversarial networks, or GANs, were really transforming image generation. So with the GAN, the idea is that you have two networks. You have a network that produces or generates content, and then you have another neural network that um, is like a judge that discards the content. So this is done like thousands and thousands of times, so that the discriminator or the judge network is like providing a lot of feedback to the generator, and gradually the generator gets better at representing the actual target of the image. Like human face is the classical example of what they used in this technology, trying to replicate realistic facial pictures. And that's actually what happened then with the NVIDIA model from uh, Karras, from Finnish researchers actually. I think the Tero Karras, NVIDIA worker. So you have heard about StyleGAN. So StyleGAN was a model. We also used that. So that was amazing because you can just load such a big model. You can load it and you can do the inference very easily by just one line of code, and it outputs a picture or like a realistic picture of human, but that human doesn't exist. So it was photorealistic facial pictures. Yeah, it was by this Karras's team that did that model, I think, back in 2017 or 16. Anyway, so But then reality is often different from the demos. Remember also the demo effect. If you see stuff on LinkedIn or papers that looks like amazingly good, then often the reality is that the examples for the demo are cherry picked. So also when we run StyleGAN, we observe challenges that actually not at all 100, because we used it to generate pictures for persona profiles. So personas are fictitious people that represent some target group or customer segment. Um, so previously we had bought the copyrights for a lot of stock photos. So we use stock photo services like 123 area for stock photo. And we bought those pictures, and because our personas could be from anywhere in the world, we had to buy, Korean pictures, Finnish pictures, American pictures, and then different age groups and different genders. So we had to buy a lot of pictures to represent like globally different demographic combinations. So we thought that, yeah, this is um, instead of spending a lot of money and time on this, let's generate them automatically by just giving the prompt. It didn't work at all with the StyleGAN back in 2017, or was it 18? Not exactly sure. But let's say a few years ago, it didn't work at all. So the problems are that maybe the bad quality rate of the image is something like 20% or something. It's enough for it not to work. Like, if 80% of the images are good, you cannot use it because you still have too high risk that you get a bad picture. 20% chance. Like 1 out of 5 can be bad. So if a user sees a persona and it looks like a Frankenstein's monster, then they'll be like, what? No, it destroys the user experience basically. So you would need to build a human in the loop where first someone verifies all the pictures before they um go into production. But we didn't. Second problem was that you couldn't condition the model properly. So it was trained on a lot of Western young people's faces. So then, let's say you want to uh, generate Arabic face of old person, doesn't work because it's not part of the training data. It really is not able. Actually, conditioning that model demographically wasn't like possible. You couldn't give a condition like to generate Arab 60-year-old male. You couldn't do that. What you could do just is to generate a random image. So you would need to do post-processing. Remember those rules. You would need to now generate 1,000 pictures and then classify them and try to find the Arab male 60 and then use that. So it's a very awkward process. We actually spend thousands of dollars trying to work with data scientists to adjust this model into our use case. Didn't work. They spent a lot of time, couldn't solve it. It was like something that maybe you would have needed like a couple million euros and like 20 data scientist team to solve it and to condition that model properly, plus a lot of new imagery covering different communities. But guess what? Nowadays, I write one prompt, give me Arab male 60. I write it to Midjourney, which is a good image generation model, or Dalle, which is now part of the ChatGPT or the Omni model in GPT-4, and boom, out goes one. It's 100% of the time usable, right? So it's transformation, and I don't need to now spend 2 million to develop a specific model. So this is one of the advantages of these big models, large models, that they really work across the use case. But of course, we still have issues. I have some slides on that. Let's see if we can get that far. So GPT-3 was introduced in 2020 paper, and the idea there is in this paper, and also this sort of few shot and zero shot are important words. what they mean, what few shot means is that in traditional or classical machine learning, we need to give a lot of samples, right? So if we want to generate a good classifier uh, or good human face generator or classifier, we need to give usually thousands and thousands of samples to develop a good model. However, few-shot learner, the idea is kind of similar to human learning, right? You don't need to see cat 500 times to be able to, distinguish it from a dog. But with classical machine learning, you sort of need to give it 500 variations of cats in different positions, colors, different environments, and the same for dogs. So then it tries to learn, all the variations that a cat's presence can have, right? So this is how classical machine learning works. With the few-shot learner, the idea is that you just give a couple of pictures of cat, and it's more quickly understands the representation of a cat versus dog. And so you need less training data, and these models are like kind of better in that respect because it's hard to produce training data that covers like all the possible scenarios. So if the model is able to learn from fewer samples, then it is kind of a better model, all else being equal. So zero shot then means that now I don't need to give any samples. I don't actually need to do any training. So this is what is happening when you do work with ChatGPT, for example. So in our last Friday session um, before Gabriel, I showed you, I pasted one of the samples from the dataset and I asked ChatGPT to tell if it's positive, negative, or neutral. So this is an example of zero shot, right? We are not training any model, we are just asking for inference. And it was correctly able to say that it was, I don't remember in that case if it was positive or negative, but whatever it was able to give a correct class. So this is zero shot, and this was also very useful for us in our system for persona generation because we could now have a situation where previously we had different organizations. So, for example, we have Al Jazeera Media Network and we have news. So, news have topics. A problem with topics is you have a drift. So, nowadays, I mean, let's say today something happens and that's a new topic. It's literally new. So let's say something happens that didn't sort of exist. So there's a new concept. So how can we, categorize it? We can categorize things if we have very broad categories like politics, sports, entertainment. So those are very sort of, broad. But if we want to be very specific about the tax and talk about really the phenomenon, let's say now there would be budget 2025, uh, uh, Christian Democrat perspective in Eastern Germany, some topic like that, So that's very specific, right? So if you want to go into more specific and new topics, especially, so then how do we train a model? So that's challenging. And another thing is that usually organizations might have limited training data. So together those things make it difficult to uh, then develop a classifier that would automatically provide a topic for a new news story. That's basically the challenge. So it's very, very difficult challenge for classical machine learning. Very, very difficult because you need to update the training data all the time. You need to update the classifier all the time. Then a lot of the organizations have thin content. So maybe they have, in Al Jazeera's case, they have huge. But let's say they have another organization like Qatar Foundation that has a lot fewer posts and videos. So you just have literally maybe few samples per uh, category. So it's too little data for classical machine learning. for zero-shot classification, no problem at all. You just provide, you can update the taxonomy of your categories anytime. So it's just a sort of array of strings. So you can put there that politics, the budget 2025 Eastern Germany, and boom, you get the stories that are closest match. This is similar to um, the Shazam example of kind of comparing. So what it's doing in the background is doing exactly that. It's comparing a specific news story that can then be represented. It can have the text, and the text can be transformed into a vector or embedding, so a series of numbers. And then for each topical category, it has also um, a series of vectors. So this East Germany budget 2025 is represented by, again, like for example, 300 digits. So, and then another topic like, sports, Super Bowl, USA 2025 has also different, it has, they have the same dimensions. Both of them can have, for example, 300 digits, but those digits will be different. And the idea is that the digits represent the meaning of the word, or the text. So it can be short text, long text, but it all goes into 300 dimensions, and those dimensions, because they're numbers, we can calculate the distance between two vectors very easily. We can say that this vector has numbers that are closer to this vector than that vector. So then we pick the one that is closest and say that, okay, yeah, this was about budget Eastern Germany 2025, or that's the prediction that the zero-shot classifier gives. Okay, so then yeah, like I said, we really saw this in motion, because when I started my, let's say, career with data science, I was here when I really started. We had like this type of models. They were already pretty good. So image generation started from something like this, which was really good back in the 2014. This was like magic. So magic, that how can a model generator face like this? It looks like a human. It's coming from nowhere. It's like magic back in 2014. So this was the revolutionary paper that really showed that you can do this. And then people started to improve that, and then it started gradually more and more realistic. And then this style gun, okay, it was 2017 came, and this again was revolutionary, because now we went from this to this, but using the same ideas, the same concept or technology, or developed it further. So this was the style gun paper, and then there was a follow-up paper, style gun version 2, and then continuing against again, so continues. Uh, but yeah, now we are at the stage where we can literally generate any realistic pictures at will using the text as a prompt, or natural language as a prompt, which is really, really amazing. These models were really confined by the fact that they were specific. It only worked for the face. You could get only the face. You cannot get the dog. And also you couldn't easily say the face is now. It was, young white people. That was basically it. But if you want old Arab people, female, oh, you cannot get, right? So, but now you can, because it has been solved by these computer scientists. And yeah, GPT models, very quick uh, evolution. So I used GPT-2, and it was kind of like garbage for our use case. So like to write persona descriptions or to describe data, no, really nothing. It's like use. So that's why, back in around this time, I was, like I mentioned, writing that this will never happen, that there's so much effort put into this generation, but it's like just garbage. The grammar is off, and most importantly, meaning. It's void of meaning. There's no meaning in it, so it doesn't really understand anything. But then happened GPT-3, and this was really the. I remember before ChatGPT came out, I was trying GPT-3 and really seeing that okay, this works like really really well, and I'm thinking like, what the hell? It's like this works so well, and it's amazing leap. And then ChatGPT came out, and all the kind of the floodgates were fail, and everyone then okay, we entered this era where it went into mainstream, and then now we are at the GPT-4 era, and now there's discussion if we are plateauing in terms of the if we are plateauing in terms of the like how how quick or how big the leap it's now, GPT-3 GPT-5, we might now say, a lot of people say it won't be as big a leap, but uh, but there's another, I think, Ethan Molliks, who is um like the leading, let's say, thought leader on generative AI, at least in LinkedIn, and he has written a great book about generative AI. He says that I think very well that if we now stop the evolution and these models wouldn't get any better than what they are now, it would still take years for them to be fully uh, their value to be fully captured, right? Because we are still so early at really using the full potential, even of the first ChatGPT that's already like a couple of years old. So what he's saying is that the models are already so good for a lot of the tasks, but we are still, the human is coming behind. We are still lagging in our adoption of the models, and like understanding how to best use them and so on. This is, I think, a very good argument, and it's kind of normal. Rogers wrote his book in 1952 about diffusion of innovations, and that was a classic book. And the argument of that book was that it takes 20 years for an innovation to really get broadly diffused. This is the book where you have the concepts come like early innovator and early adopter, and then maturity and laggards and so on, that those kind of categories coming from him. But he said that that cycle takes like 20 years. But here it's kind of a couple of years. With digital technologies, everything is innovations are diffusing much more quickly than before. But still, it's not reasonable to assume that like kind of the whole humanity is adopting something in just a couple of years. So that's why we are still lacking in this adoption. We lack, rules and guidelines and norms and standards and stuff like that in organizations and in educational institutions and so on. So yeah, we are trying to catch up with the technology pace. So even if ChatGPT or GPT-5 won't be, as big a leap as GPT-3 was from GPT-2, then that's kind of fine because we need some time to catch up. One interesting aspect here is that this tweet that a lot of the NLP work, because NLP people were working on each problem kind of individually, sentiment analysis, translation, text paraphrasing, those were all, there's a lot of like individual tasks. Translation is a task, text summarization is a task. Um, there are a lot of tasks that are like specialized, so then people were working on this, and then comes a model that boom, all of a sudden there's no need to develop a specialized model or a specialized algorithm for translation and text classification and text generation and all these NLP distinct use cases, right? Because now ChatGPT can handle all of those. So this is another like interesting shift, and here the person is lamenting that now NLP researchers are kind of out of job but actually it's not true. So now what NLP researchers are working on things like retrieval augmented generation. So how to provide contextual information for these models, how to evaluate the models, how to generate baseline or benchmark data sets in evaluating these models in specific tasks and so on and so on. So actually, if you look at the top conferences, you can see that they have adapted to this situation. And it's good, right? They're not trying to say that we still need a specialized model for translation. At least maybe some might say that, but then they might have a really good reason for it. Like, for example, okay, it cannot handle the like special minority language that's spoken in a small Polynesian island. So ChatGPT cannot handle that, right? So we need still specialized research to develop that model. So there might be arguments like that, and but for the most part, they have moved to testing these models and with the generative AI. So I think this is an encouraging sign because it kind of, at the first glance, what he's saying here kind of looks like it makes sense that now we don't need NLP research, but the reality shows otherwise. People are very inventive and good at adopting technologies and still finding aspects to research about. So this idea also generalizes to marketing because um, uh, these models, their application to marketing is not like automatic. We need to still figure out the task, we need to figure out the evaluation, we need to figure out what is the overall pipeline of producing content, releasing content, supervising the content. Just requires us to understand really this technology well, and then understanding the marketing use case well, and then find out those matches. So it will not happen automatically. And that friction there, or like they call in economics, transaction costs, are where people are needed to make sure that the value is created and derived from these values. And yeah, this was the quote of Ethan Mollick, in that, even if those systems are not developing, or those models are not developing, that it will still take a lot of time for kind of humanity and organizations to catch up, even with the current technology. We are developing more slowly as like humans than as technology sort of is developing. Okay, yeah, and like I said, there are a lot of, it's ongoing, so a lot of interesting angles that have not been resolved, like, the things from how does marketing education look like in the future. For example, will there be a need for thesis, because nowadays ChatGPT can write the thesis almost better than you can, right? So why do you need to write it? You don't. If you are using ChatGPT for it, then you don't. But if we treat the thesis process as a learning task for you to learn how to find relevant research, how to analyze that critically, how to detect good reference from a bad reference, and how to express your thinking in writing, if we frame that as the problem, right? Which actually it is. That's why we do thesis, so that you learn. We don't do thesis so that there is 25 pages of text generated. If that was the goal, then yeah, ChatGPT would write all the theses in the world. But since the actual goal is for you to learn those skills, then it doesn't make sense really to use ChatGPT. We professional researchers use ChatGPT in some capacity because we already have those basic skills. So we know how to evaluate if it's doing correctly. But if you're asking it to find your references without you actually doing searches in databases, it will find you old, expired, irrelevant, even made up references. And then you might believe all that because you don't know that it's important to find new reputable, relevant, reference. You have no way of distinguishing if it's doing a good job or not. So this is a big risk that people would just accept. And research shows that very few people, if they use generative AI, they actually then do separate searches. Everyone says that's yeah, student, you can use it, but then check those independently. How many of you actually goes and check? No, you just take what you get. You just take what you get because human is kind of lazy. So there's the principle of least effort. So if you can get the job done and it looks good to you, then you just go with it. Because otherwise you're doing double work. If anyway you're searching for the references and doing that work, then why would you use even ChatGPT? So, uh, but we will see how it evolves in marketing education. There are so many different ways of seeing it, and at the same time, we should be teaching you about how to use these tools. But we are using them in the practice session. For example, in the coming week's practice session, we use ChatGPT to generate code. So you will see a little bit about that. But there also the principle applies. If you don't know how machine learning works and you ask it to generate machine learning model, if it makes a mistake, you will not be able to detect that. So that's the danger. That's why the basic skills are very important. Once you have basic skills, generative AI will give you superpower. The same applies, to marketing. So if you do copywriting, if you don't understand the principles of good copywriting, or you don't understand your target group, then you're asking ChatGPT to write a ad text. It looks good, but is it good? You don't know because you have no idea of what a good copy text is, right? So the more, the better basic skills you have, the more you are able to augment your outputs using generative AI, kind of, or because you can take that basis that the generative AI produce, you can improve it, or if you want to use it as it is, you know, you can evaluate that it's good enough. But if you don't know what is good enough, you cannot do the evaluation, and there's a big risk that it's just producing something that's either average or even erratic, but you wouldn't know that. Yeah, so we will see what happens in the future. But some things we know is that AI doesn't automatically make you smart. So this is also a kind of fallacy thinking in that some people have. And we can see it kind of even in this course because I'm telling you to use Cypherbot, but a Cypherbot could make you really smart. I mean, in terms of giving a lot of information, but very few of you use it, and very few of you use it in kind of a way that is really improving your skills. So we still don't really. Um, it's not a magic remedy like in Matrix movie where Neo gets uploaded in his brain a new skill, teach me taekwondo, teach me how to pilot a jet plane, and then okay, let me upload, and then the engineer there uploads the program, and now it's okay, now I know how to do. So this is now not how learning works and information transference works. So again, human is the sort of the weak link in that. So that's why we need to really uh, push our own like understanding of concepts and developing basic skills. So not to rely too much on AI. And yeah, I already explained about these other things. That's AI slump is a big risk because if you were to use it to generate your thesis, for example, then now you have learned nothing. So now if you were given a task to find more information or do critical information search and analysis, you wouldn't know how to do it because you never learned it. So now your only chance is to use AI for it again, right? So now if you would lose the access to AI, you would be kind of useless. That's one risk. But the second risk is that now you also cannot, now you're always limited by how well AI does it. So AI doesn't still at this point, right, sort of actually handle the whole thesis process better than human. It might look like it, but I guarantee you, if I can see a thesis written by a top student versus a top AI, the top student will beat the top AI. It kind of happens still. Maybe different in the case of averages, but when talking about top, so getting to that top, you first need to be basic level, then you know, a little bit higher than basic, and then a top, right? So this evolution only happens by kind of trial and error and hands-on doing. So you need to repeat those activities to learn the skills and become better at it yourself. So if you outsource all of your kind of tasks to an AI, you will not get better at the task, and you're at this AI slump, which is a very dangerous place also because that gives you no competitive advantage in the job market. You have thousands of people who know how to use AI, right? So, why should anyone sort of pick you? But if you are better than AI, then of course you will get picked. This is kind of the idea. And in marketing, we also mm, have this issue now of explosion of mediocrity. So a lot of content now, blog posts, social media posts are like losing value if they are generated by AI. The more you see it, the more you kind of become, mm, let's say, intolerant to it, or the more you appreciate genuine human content, because there are still certain type of formulaic nature in AI's content, and it's not really, a blog post by AI doesn't express any interesting thought. That's the challenge. So the AI can maybe provide you with the idea of a blog post, can also provide you with a rough text, but then if you're a talented writer, you are needed to make that post actually interesting and expressing some original thought. So this is good way of thinking about AI. It's a tool, but you need to augment it. You need to augment it. It can augment also you by giving you inspiration and ideas and so on. So this red queen race refers to the idea that if everyone is using AI to produce average content, so even if you improve together with AI, you're not improving more than the others, right? So everyone is running at the same pace, so you need to run faster than others to get ahead, sort of. That's the idea of red queen race. This concept from strategic management. Yeah, so but we have this idea that there is a replacement going on. A lot of people are worried about automation taking over jobs and destroying industries, and this is part of the movement. So there will be fewer jobs, and then jobs are eliminated by automation. It's a really big concern. But here is the interesting thing. This is a quote from 1961, actually. So it's the automation, or the fear of automation, has been around for more than 50 years. So when you think about it, we still have jobs today, right? But they are now more refined and novel. So that's why I think this, um, even in marketing, or let's say especially in marketing, there shouldn't be too much worry, because people always will have new needs, and people always kind of follow other people. So even though nowadays we have these virtual influencers or characters that don't exist and people follow those, but there's still a lot of service that we want from other people, and we appreciate that. And yeah, robots can also do something, but still, it doesn't really. It's really hard to imagine a scenario where we wouldn't need other people. Actually, everything that we do is for other people. If you would remove all the other people from the world, everyone's life would lose their meaning, right? Because what would you do without other people? I couldn't teach anyone if I did research. Why? Like, who would it serve? Not anyone. So we always need like other people, and this is kind of a strong argument why there that need will be that need is sort of always productized and transformed into a product and or service, and then there will be an infinite need. And also in business sector, so now we have something like AI specialist, a job didn't exist, or even job like prompt engineer didn't exist. Like, with the new technologies come also new jobs, because organizations need this new competence and skill to catch up. So this is a natural sort of competitive cycle in the business world. So that's a good news. So likely we still have um still have job for humans in there. So I had this idea of incompleteness theorem and it applying to this um idea that because people always are scared of the losing the job because they are looking at today, you're looking at today's situation. Yeah, sure. If you look at today's situation, we would all be redundant, right? But you forget that as the that world is changing, so the goalpost is shifting, right? So tomorrow's economy will be different, so it will have different division of labor and stuff. So you shouldn't be looking at how things are now and thinking we are being replaced, but this reality is changing. Societal reality is changing, and through that, these new opportunities will sort of almost always emerge. And this was interesting also from the early days in 1960s, the man-computer hypothesis. This, I think, describes really well the concept of combining the strengths of AI and then or machines and then humans, and with kind of optimistic message that we can tackle more challenging problems by this combination. And I'm also seeing this in my work because really I can do data analysis much faster than before. I can do research write-ups much faster than before. It's like it's quite amazing. So really I am using this to increase my productivity. I'm doing research, but if I was working in as a business analyst or marketing analyst, the same would apply, and I could do a lot more than I could previously. So it's already sort of reality. So in 1960, Lick Leader thought that that would be a nice vision, but now in 2024, it's true. We are doing this. It's happening. People are doing it. So it's quite amazing shift in 64 years. Okay, let's go into some use cases in marketing. Here's Gartner's idea. I think this is a good sort of analysis or visualization when it comes to applicability. So remember that we talked about traditional AI and generative AI. So here, prediction and forecasting and decision intelligence, the way they define it, it would be classical AI approaches. So those are, let's say, numerically heavy or rule heavy use cases, then generative AI might not be optimal. But again, like I said, ChatGPT can do prediction, but it does it by falling back to a real predictive model. It doesn't use the language for that. It just uses the language to interpret the problem and then generate code with classical machine learning and then solving the problem and returning the answer to you. So in that sense, it can handle this kind of prediction problem, but it doesn't language model itself doesn't do it without classical AI. So segmentation classification is kind of similar. It's still, I think, segmentation using LLM without using traditional AI is a little bit weak. But this part, it shows some promise. Could see that if we provide descriptions of customers, it has the ability to categorize. Evaluating those categories will be more difficult, but that's a general problem of evaluating segments or clusters. Recommendation systems, kind of the same thing. So content generation and conversational UIs are what Gartner thinks that it's best for. And so this would roughly be compatible with top marketing cases, right? So text, image, video generation, those are really clear marketing use cases. So for marketing use case, generative AI seems to be very good. And conversational UI can be translated to customer service chatbots. So again, clear marketing use case where it can be useful. So this, like at a superficial level, it seems that generative AI is very useful for marketing. So for example, email, newsletters, blog posts, advertising. We actually did, was this in 2022? An experiment where we had in one company, we had an intern that wrote really nice copy text. Usually marketing interns, they don't know how to write nice copy text, but he knew and we could see it and we tested it by putting a couple of more senior writers against him, and then we did A/B testing Google Ads and he had the highest CTR rate and he won a gift card. This was for Christmas campaigns. And so we looked at the click-through rates and he had the highest click-through rates and he won the two others. But then we pitted him the following year. I think it was early 2023. So we pitted him against GPT 3.5. So we gave him and the prompt, him the same prompt as for ChatGPT and to generate Google Ads copy text. And GPT 3.5 beat him clearly. So this was quite remarkable. So then next we gave him GPT 3.5's ads and we said improve this, and just to see if human can reach the same level. So then he improved those, and we did another test, and now they were at even level, roughly even. So some metrics that we measured, human was a bit better for, but not really by a lot. Not maybe, you know, outside like statistical random chance. So they were kind of at the end was that they were kind of at the same level. So it was really kind of eye-opening that okay, it's really hard to beat these models. So even good copywriters kind of struggle with that. Yeah, so that was a couple of years ago. But I don't think the GPT's copywriting skills have improved by a lot, but they are pretty good at standard copy creation. It's as good as average copywriter, absolutely. And a lot of, by definition, average marketer is an average copywriter, right? Because that's the medium part of the distribution. So it has reached that level. So for ad copywriting, it beats or either beats or is at the same level as most marketers, which is kind of, it can be scary if you think of it or as a threat, but it can be also exciting if you think of it as an opportunity. Because for example, I can now use ChatGPT to write copy text in different languages, and I can actually trust that it it's doing good enough job. And I can even ask it to explain, produce a couple of variations and explain which one is the best. And then I'll use that one because it has a certain understanding of language, right? And about kind of that culture, or how marketing language is typically written in that country's context. So it's pretty cool. So it's empowering also, not only a threat, but also opportunity. Data analysis, like I mentioned, hugely valuable, but you need to know what to ask. If you just give, here is some data, and you haven't cleaned it, you don't have understanding of the data, you don't have questions, it will struggle. It will kind of struggle with data cleaning. So you should know how to do that yourself. And also it struggles because if you don't have clear questions and you have a lot of variables, what will happen is that you get a lot of random analysis. If you're sort of fine with that, that's one approach, but it's definitely less optimal than asking it very specific questions about the data. So, this is an important part. Data cleaning that you should do, and figuring out the specific questions that you have about the data is another. For idea generation, really good. For blog post ideas, also one person used it as a reverse a reverse ideation tool, meaning that they said that I asked ChatGPT to give me 10 blog post ideas or whatever. And then now I know what I don't want to write about, right? So then, because the idea is that ChatGPT is giving like typical topics which are boring. So, okay, I will definitely not write about that. I'll write about something different that ChatGPT cannot anticipate, right? So it's kind of, give and take. For, again, in my profession in research, I'm asking it to generate experimental designs. So that's quite difficult, right? Because experimental design requires, on one part, an understanding of experiment, what experiment is, and how you communicate that, and what are the decisions you need to make. So you need to have technical understanding of experiments, but you also have to have creativity, because what you are testing, the variables and their levels, those need to make sense in the context that, that research is actually valuable and it should be done. And I'm pretty much blown away by uh, ChatGPT, and actually I use Claude. I use Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is, in my opinion, better model than GPT-4. So I use that for my data analysis and pretty much everything. So it's really good at this task of generating research ideas. So it's actually able to understand what experiments are. It designs them well, very quickly, in a matter of seconds, and they are also relevant. And I know that because I have studied, this. I have been a researcher in this, for example, data-driven personas for 7 years. So I'm an expert in that. I did it long before AI. But I'm looking at the designs that it gives me, and I'm like, holy crap. It's like, I didn't think of that. And actually, that's a relevant experiment design in data-driven personas. So, um, yeah, it's really good at brainstorming and idea generation, in my opinion. One also use case could be sparring, and this I didn't see mm, mentioned a lot, but it's almost like the idea that if you have a you have to give a presentation, or you have to get your boss's buy-in. So buy-in means like a permission. You want to sell an idea, if you want to develop a new product or launch a new campaign or whatever you want, and you need resources for that in the organization. So you need to sell that idea first, and you will present that idea. And then if those people you're presenting to accept, then you get your resources. If they don't buy the idea, you will not. So sparring for that. You could have a sort of like a chatbot that is trying to knock your idea down or kind of simulate mm, your supervisor, and then you would need to convince them. So this type of sparring could be useful before going into very important meetings, kind of by simulating those meetings ahead and the questions and kind of yeah, the tough questions that you might have beforehand, because then you could adjust your presentation and figure out counter arguments and so on. So this I think would be a very good use case um, for these models. Overall, what might be challenging use cases are factual use cases. So a lot of the stuff like research, literature review, citation checking, fact cross-checking, those are problematic because the models here rely kind of they can have this hallucination aspect where they generate something that's not correct. And if you ask them to find references, even for like research purpose, they will not find the best ones, because the best ones might be behind paywalls, first of all, so it's not part of their training material. So you should actually use academic database to do the searches. You'll find more relevant and more recent references. So this is one challenge. And also sometimes it can hallucinate total like sources. And I think Levi asked the question last night in the lecture notes about why it can hallucinate some content from a real reference that exists, but that content doesn't exist, right? So how is it possible? It finds like the real article, but then it imagines a wrong content. So it's because of the like the statistical prediction process that is underlying the text generation. So actually what it hallucinates is content that could be in that article. So based on kind of the linguistics of the article, the concepts that they use, they could have said this. The only thing is that they didn't, right? So actually, the authors of that article might agree with the argument, but we don't know that if they would. That's the problem. So it's putting, words on people's mouth, and that's why it's bad for factual use case. For creative use cases, like the ones we discussed in the previous slide, it's very good for brainstorming, for generating content, given that we sort of know what we want and we know how to evaluate the usefulness of the or the quality of the content. But yeah, this is I think was a nice really illustration of the creative abilities. So input by a 30-year-old and then transformed by AI into the final picture. It looks like magic, right? It's a really amazing amazing ability to exhibit creative like tendency. So it's really awesome. And this is kind of like interesting backslash from the artistic community, that they are saying that AI is not able to generate art and it's not real art. And they're not necessarily all of them, but I see a lot of that kind of resistance, which is to me a bit silly, because art is an experience, and if someone appreciates that piece, then really who cares who has created it, right? So this, some artists are too much in the resistance mode, and that will not be good for them. Other artists are going along and using AI tools to enhance their art, which is much much more productive, of course, because whether or not we like it, this is the direction. And I've seen AI generated content, artistic contents, and I had, the artistic art experience from it. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is really making me think and, experience the something and feel something. So it is art to me. And nobody else can say that, oh, it's not art, right? Because art is a subjective experience. It's not that some, committee decides that this is art and that is not art. So it's kind of interesting. For creative purposes, it's good. Here's our system, survey the persona, generating from survey data using LLMs. It's automatic persona profiles with the name, picture, description. So the content here is from real data set that's segmented using classical AI, so clustering algorithms, but that clustering output is then given to an LLM that writes up the content here. And then there are some illustrations that also originate from the data of that particular persona. So here's a good example of how it can be, this generative AI can be used as part of a customer or user segmentation pipeline along with other algorithmic tools and other like system components to generate a persona. So this would, for example, persona generation is classically something that if you give it to a consulting company, maybe they take 6 months and it will cost like 100,000 euro, and then they give you 5 personas. But with systems like this, if you have the data, you can upload and it will be ready in 1 minute. And it's kind of like based on statistically robust patterns, or at least more robust than, if we have a person create them, because the person will have like their human biases and stereotypes that can then go into the personas. So this doesn't have any human bias. Might have some degree of algorithmic bias, but yeah, when it comes to segmenting people, there's no perfection. At least this one will give you always the same personas, but if you give two people a data set, they will pretty much always create different personas. So that kind of human process for segmentation is much more random than this kind of algorithmic. This is much more stable way of doing segmentation. Then one use case is that I'm kind of looking forward is the chat commerce. So this is interesting that it didn't yet fully happen, because this would be a really good marketing use case. And especially this would be good for Google, because you might remember from the Essentials of Digital Marketing course, we discussed the shopping ads and the importance of product feeds, and sort of marketers needing to work with IT to configure especially in e-commerce, the product database so that it's represented as a feed, so that it shows in shopping ads in Google search engine result page, but also in anywhere, like in YouTube, also have product ads. In display networks, you have product ads. So those come from the feed, and the feed contains the information about the product that is then being automatically inputted by Google into those ads. So Google has a lot of companies use this, millions and millions use the Google Merchant Center to upload their product feeds, and that are automatically, kept in real time, and Google checks those every day, and then if there are changes in the product catalog, it updates the ads. And so Google has a lot. This is, like a product graph, knowledge graph. We discussed graphs in second lecture. So this is like a product graph, hugely valuable. So why isn't Google creating this chat commerce that we could, buy instead of using Google search page and going to website? We could sort of buy directly by using a Gemini, for example. So yeah, it just shows that Google is behind in this game. Actually, it was Google researcher who introduced transformers. So that was one of the papers there, 2017. Attention is all you need. So this infrastructure that led to GPT models is invented by Google. It's weird. Google is so much behind. It's behind Claude, it's behind OpenAI. Its models are much, I mean, at least in my experience, they are worse. And that's the general reputation as well. And the leaderboards, Google is not leading in any of the leaderboards against OpenAI, for example. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, and think of it, Google's index. Google has by far the biggest index because it has almost every web site, and when it indexes them, that it extracts their content. So it should have huge text base is much bigger than something like OpenAI, a sort of relatively tiny startup. Now it's already bigger company, but it was tiny startup. How can it develop a model that's so much better than what Google has, kind of like under the radar? When Google has all the data, it has the best infrastructure for the deep learning network, the transformers, and still someone is coming under the radar and like kind of stealing the market. And ever since, Google is struggling to catch up. So this chat commerce is, I think, is one example of why of this problem that Google has with generative AI. For marketers, this is really important because if Google kind of struggles with this, it has a big triple ripple effects to our profession, right? I have used the concept of Google business to describe a lot of the small and medium-sized businesses that really depend on Google's organic traffic and paid traffic. So like, more than 50% of their traffic coming from Google, paid plus organic, in combination. And so if Google starts to struggle in its ranking of, um, AI generated content, or how its search engine result page works, if people start using it less for info, like I personally using Google less, I'm using AI more nowadays for a lot of the, especially for my informative search. Informative searches I use more now, maybe AI than Google, but that doesn't directly hurt Google because informative searches don't show ads, so Google is not losing money. But if this chat commerce comes, now I'm doing my buying in ChatGPT. Now it will hurt Google because Google is getting its money from the sponsored results. So sponsored means that when I have commercial intent, I'm looking for a new um, sofa or a bed, I go to Google. But if instead I'm going to ChatGPT, okay, show me the beds now. I want a bed. And I tell it I want a two-person bed. I want it to be firm, and then here's my price range. Now show me what you got, and then it showed me directly. Kind of like this. With Amazon is doing this already, sort of. So it shows the product already, and then I think with Amazon, you still need to go and click the link. But in the future, if these systems are able to, okay, I want that one. Tell me more about it. Okay, tell me, summarize all the reviews you have about it. Like in Amazon's case, this is great. They have so many reviews written by people. Now, of course, some of them written by AI also, which is their problem because they need to get the inauthentic reviews out. So this review spam or fake review detection is a big thing, but that's another problem. So they could summarize instead of me having to read hundreds of reviews. The AI can summarize. Yeah, okay, here are the top three aspects that are good about this product. Here are the top three negative points that people are complaining about. And then, okay, yeah, the negative point looks like, for example, I'm going to a vacation. Oh yeah, it looks like it's too cold this time of year, people complaining. Okay, so can you recommend me warmer places this time? Okay, sure. No, no, no. And now it goes through the travel agency's websites and it gives me those options. And okay, here this place has medium temperature of this time of year. It's recommended by others concerning its temperature, and its price is matching what you previously asked, and so on and so on. So now it's much faster than browsing those travel agency websites, clicking and using filter and trying to find, and then there's no information about is it actually warm. You need to do Google searches, and you need to use another tab, browser tab, for finding that information. And then some people might like the you know search process because it's part of the experience, sure, but others just want to get the job done. So it's clear to see the value of conversational commerce or this chat commerce in the future. And this might have really, really big ramifications for marketers, because then how we get into this chat dialogue because becomes the focus of our optimization efforts. And it might be that we need to drop like Google, because if people's behavior, their buying behavior changes, it would immediately mean that Google becomes irrelevant for us. That would be the biggest shift in digital marketing's history, actually, because for 20 years or so, Google has for more than 25 years, Google has dominated the industry, which is huge. It's like quarter of a century. But all monopolies fall usually in free markets over time. So maybe this is something we will see. There are still challenges. I listed some like API integrations, trust issues, and security concerns, stuff like that, mm, which kind of explain why it's not happening, has not happened, in my opinion. I think people probably would be ready, but you do have some trust issues and something. But the hallucination aspect is not the problem, because if you have an API that gives you information about the products, it gives you the reviews, there's very little probability that it hallucinates. In those, that's the whole point of the RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, that you give this specific structured information. So now it's actually forming its response. So if you are extracting a list of products and you're asking ChatGPT or an LLM to choose from those products, there's almost zero chance that it would choose a product that doesn't exist, because it's literally going through that list. So it is, the hallucination is not the issue here, even though that's like, the biggest worry that you hear about. New product development. There's an interesting here's here's sort of product developer talking about that they have, if they have requirements, they're looking forward to AI bringing those requirements to life, and that's already we are already getting toward that direction. There was an interesting idea from Sam Altman, one of the founders of OpenAI, which was that he's looking forward to the situation when the first $1 billion company is created by one person, like one person, $1 billion company. Because now, if I do something like consultation or whatever, and I have my company, there's no way I can scale it up, because to scale it up, I need to hire other people. This is the capitalistic idea, right? Or idea of capitalism, that you employ other people and those other people work for you, and they generate more value than what you have to pay them, and that profit then grows the company, right? And then you scale up by hiring more people. So this kind of shifted a bit with like unicorn companies like Facebook and Google that actually can scale through digital platforms, uh, so that they hire one person, and that one person is bringing value of like in millions because of the scale effects. So if it's a good software engineer, their value is huge, and that's why their salaries can be like a software engineer at Google can earn $1 million per year. That's quite amazing, right? Just being a software engineer. Of course, not all of them earn that, but it's not like impossible salary there at all. So it's because they produce through the mechanisms Google bringing in so much money through digital platforms, that when you divide that by head count, you see that okay, 10 million per head. Okay, we can pay him 1 million, kind of like this. So but the scalability, so the idea of Sam Altman was that instead of hiring people, now we create agents. So I create GPT to do my marketing, GPT to my customer service, GPT to do my product development, and then I'm the architect supervising those GPTs. There are some, I've seen some posts where people are kind of trying that. They have multiple software as a service startup ideas, and they have created now this agentic um, um, flows to manage the different things. So it is very interesting. I think it is like a direction where we're headed, where the agents. So agent is different than just using ChatGPT. Agent is more, does more basically. Is more comprehensive. So with the ChatGPT, you need to give all the prompts individually if you want a marketing some action. You need to give like 10 prompts, and if you don't give a prompt, it doesn't do. So the idea of agent is that it's more autonomous, and you can give bigger things like, okay, start doing Google ads. So if you tell this to ChatGPT, it gives you some plan and directions and na na na. So in future, if those agents exist, it understands what is needed for Google Ads. So it would create its own plan, and then it would be connected to Google Ads, and it would actually go ahead and start creating campaigns and so on and so on. So it's not that you have to ask every single thing separately, but the agent understands what belongs to your request, what are the subtasks, and it can go ahead and start implementing them. So this is kind of the future. We are not there yet, but there's no fundamental reason why we couldn't go at least some steps toward that direction, because this language understanding obstacle has been struggled sort of solved, right? It can all of those steps, if you ask it to do individually now, you can it sort of can do them in programmatic environment. So then why couldn't it handle all of them like autonomously? You need to create the agent that has like a system prompt with a specific expertise, and then it, like a specialist person doing Google Ads, would have an idea of what subtasks belong to that, how to set up accounts, how to create campaigns, how to write copy text and so on. So it's like a human, but um, it's not a human, it's an agent. So this is the interesting direction. And yeah, we are seeing this kind of happening. This is a couple of years old post where we already saw this kind of happening, which is really interesting, because indeed this is like a 3-year-old post, and already this is foreshadowing the idea that something big is coming, because the person is telling how they use some base technologies to create something that over in like a day that used to take them maybe months to create. So this direction is accelerating, and now there are, for example, in Claude Canva mode where you can, or Canvas mode, where you can prototype real apps. So this type of thing you can now do inside the chat, basically. You can prototype. But there is still a problem, because a lot of this stuff is not, if you don't understand what you're doing, you will struggle, because this, I think, do you understand this meme? What's the problem with this meme? That's a good test. Can someone explain this meme? No? Okay, maybe I'll explain it then. So yeah, anyone can be an engineer. Now I literally built something in minutes and then show me, and then it's running in localhost. So it's running locally in the person's computer, but that's what he sees in the browser address bar. So he pastes that without understanding that nobody else can see that app except him. So he doesn't understand what's the difference between a local
staged version and then a deployed version that's existing in like a public directory or server. So so yeah, you can do stuff, but if you do stuff and you don't understand what you're doing, you might have issues. So you might have a lot of security issues as well and so on. So yeah, in product development, engineering principles are important for things like security and authentication and so basic computer engineering principles are important. But still, uh, there's a lot of value and there's a lot of stuff that like use cases where we can run code as marketers without actually building full apps. So here's I think an inspiring use case from Uber to so as you remember, we have talked about SQL being very important. So SQL is a language, it's a scripting language. And what I've basically said is that, well, writing SQL is no problem for an LLM. ChatGPT can write SQL very easy because it's a structured language. It's a well-known language, been around for 50 years. Um, it's easy, right? So if we know what we want, find the number of trips completed in Seattle yesterday. Simsalabim, chatbot can easily transform that into a SQL query and uh, and generate a query, and then you can run the query. If the chatbot had a connection to the database already, it could also run the query and just return you the results, right? But in this case, it seems like in Uber, or this query GPT doesn't have an access to specific um, tables, so it's just giving sort of uh, giving it has an understanding of the table structure because it knows what tables there are, so it has like this data dictionary that we discussed, but then the query would be actually run by the person doing the analysis. But yeah, this is one example of how SQL could be run or code could be sort of run or generated together with AI. That's a very um, useful use case for marketing. And then yeah, so that query GPT was fine-tuned or contextualized. So fine-tuned kind of means that the model is it's a little bit the original meaning of fine-tuning is that the model is running model is retrained to an extent, and it's like retrained to understand specific context that it didn't understand. So like uh, for example, we could have a new language, well, maybe not a new language, but something that's very domain specific. So if you had a language model and you had a sentiment classifier and sentiment, it could do sentiment, but then your uh, context of you had like something medical devices or something very specific, you could give a part of the training set, or you could give a training set to the model to help it understand the vocabulary in medical like equipment, what means, what is positive and negative in that context. So you're trying to make the model understand a specific domain, so that would be fine tuning. But the concept is kind of a little bit losing its context because nowadays these models are conditioned a little bit differently, so we are not fine tuning GPT-4 or GPT. So we don't have access to that base model. There are open source models that we could fine tune, but more often we provide some kind of instructions to it and some kind of information to it, like in the prompt. So in the prompt, then the prompt would contain kind of the fine tuning, and then it would be able to do something. So you would, for example, if you provided documentation about Google Ads script language uh, to a GPT, then you can create a custom GPT, right? Because kind of like here in the system prompt, it has information. So now if you're asking it to generate some script, you don't need to all the time paste the documentation, but it's already part of this TPD. So that's why we can call it, fine-tuned. Not sure if this is making sense, but it's basically about us providing more specialized information to model so that it knows kind of things that it might not otherwise know. If I give documentation, this language, for example, uh, Google Ads query language is specific, so it might not be part of the training set, or then it might be using older version of the documentation. But if I give it to the system prompt when I create this new GPT, I tell it always refer to this documentation, and then I'm pasting it there when you're providing answers. So now it has the latest documentation. It can read that documentation and understand. So when it's generating its response, it's using the GPT model behind there for the general language understanding. But before it generates the response, it looks at the documentation. And if it finds from there any information for the response, it uses that information and then it writes, okay, here is what you should do according to the documentation, write this and this script. So this is the idea of kind of customizing the models. Okay, some tips. um, Very important tip that I kind of keep mentioning or mentioned a couple of times is this um, basic skills development. So here I have sort of like a long rant about the illusion of similarities, which I think exemplifies well the difference between an expert and a layperson, right? So in this is again from my domain or my profession of a researcher. So we could have two research papers that both look the same, right? They have the same number of words. Their English is really fluent and it's well written, right? And then they have the same structure, the professional academic structure, and so on and so on. So and yeah, so they look like identical. I give them to you and you read them. Oh yeah, both are very good research. But the other one can be total crap as a research. It can be total like poor experiment design, not reporting adequately the details, some kind of flaw in how in the methodology, inadequate literature review, too old references, references from bad resources, omitting some important work that I would know but you would not know because you don't know the field, and so on, right? Or then visualizations, missing labels in X and Y uh, access or whatever, right? So a lot goes into when expert evaluates a paper. So for a lay person, they look identical. Expert immediately says this is good work, that is not good work. So this goes again to the point that if you don't have kind of those basic skills or expertise, you cannot evaluate the output. So first develop those basic skills and focus on that in your education. And then second is we talked about the average performance. So this is a quote from Steve Jobs. One machine can do the work of 50 ordinary men. No machine can do the work of one extraordinary man. It's a shame that Steve Jobs is not alive anymore because he was fantasizing for the of the like a long time ago. He was speculating on the idea of talking of AI getting to a point where you could discuss with the ancient philosophers like Plato and so on. So he had that idea that when that has happened, then AI is really good, and that has happened now. So we can um, LLMs can take the role or the persona uh, of Socrates or Plato, and you can have conversation. If you want even better degree of that, you can put all of Plato's writings into an LLM and really fine tune a Plato LLM, and it will be kind of a realistic. So and it goes a little bit more than just mimicry. I would say they really ability to copy style and the way of thinking is high. So I would really like to hear Steve Jobs's impression, but I think we are at that point that he was sort of envisioning. But here, so with this quote, the main point is that it's easy to be average, but if you're above than average, then you can sort of that's your competitive advantage. So with copywriting, if you need to become really good at it to beat the ChatGPT, but that's what drives future, and that's what drives development and performance in organizations and in the world. It's a competition. We're competing against others. Companies are competing, organizations, countries are competing, employees are competing. Now we are also competing against AI, but we also collaborate with AI, right? So it's not the AI is not trying to compete with us. It's not trying. It doesn't have harmful intent. It's just doing what we ask it to do. But in some situations, we are pitted possibly against the AI. So we should really focus on developing some skills really well so that we can evaluate the AI. And in some cases, we can do better work than AI and we can improve AI's work further. If we don't have the basic skills, we cannot. If you don't know how to write or express your thoughts, you don't know how to write English, you cannot like improve the English language skill. That's why don't use those automatic translation tools and don't use AI to translate your thoughts in email message. Like literally last week I had a student sending me message. I could immediately see it's AI generated and I couldn't understand a word. It was not clear expression of the thought. So then I wrote her back and I said, look, why don't you write in your own words and explain the problem? She replied with a simple sentence, okay, now I start to get your problem. So learn to express your thoughts. This will be a very, very important because it's communication. In marketing, you need to be able to communicate efficiently with team members and also with customers and stakeholders and so on. So that is very important. Um, Prompt design, we have a couple of minutes left. So prompt design and prompt engineering, you hear these words. I might ask about this in the exam. Prompt engineering is more formal way of systematically testing different variations and possibly including dynamic prompts that have something like information that's coming from other source. Whereas this prompt design is kind of how would I ask? They both are about how would I ask AI to do something, right? So that's what prompt engineering and prompt design try to accomplish. But how they go about it is different. With the design, it's just like it's a simple thing. I'm trying to figure out what to do. With engineering, it's more nuanced. So we test different variations and we somehow evaluate the results. So it's a little bit more scientific. That's the difference. Prompt engineering is more methodological way of doing it because this might give you a result, the simple prompt, but then you might need to, how do you know if the result is good enough? How do you know if another prompt would give you a different result, right? So that's why the prompt engineering idea is that how do we design prompts that are really doing things in an optimal way? So we call that engineering. Evaluation is a keyword. So before we had, this, so in software engineering, kind of a meme here. So works on my machine, I'm happy. So, okay, but how does it work outside your machine? Does it work at all? So again, the same with the prompt. So the prompt, oh yeah, the output looks good to me. So that's not proper evaluation, right? So the software engineer needs to run the code in like real production environments to know if it works, and then the person doing the prompting needs to evaluate the output's performance somehow. Evaluation is the key. Remember, machine learning models, we need to evaluate how well our algorithm is doing. But so this really important concept from computer science really that we can apply also in marketing, because when it produces for example, copywriting or text, how do we evaluate if it's good enough? So if we have when we have ad hoc cases, when we use it casually, it's maybe fine to just subjectively evaluate. But if we use it at scale, and especially if we use it as part of marketing automation, we need to do more thorough evaluation. So evaluation of the LLM outputs is one part where which is critical, and that's where experts are needed, and that's where human can still have a really important contribution. Then another is chain of thought prompting. So it's a little bit similar to what I said about providing more context. So if we have a real business or like a prompt, a business owner wants to figure out if they should invest in SEO or PPC, and then how should they approach this situation. So you might get a good sort of response, but in some cases you might tell more specifically on what aspects to consider. So this is the chain of thought that you provide sort of a path of how the model should approach the problem. So you consider goals and timeline, budget, market, an audience, current presence, measurability, weight these factors against the business specific situation. So this tells the process of how to solve this problem. So a chain of thought prompting contains sort of the steps for the solution. So sometimes it can be helpful if you want a more structured solution for your prompt. Okay, now we are pretty much out of time. I encourage you to review these risks independently. So I'll post the slides. I'll post the slides, and I also upload them to Cypherbot. And yeah, we didn't get into these risks, but there are a lot of risks and challenges. So it's important that you review. I think they're sort of relatively well explained and illustrated here in the slides. So we have a lot of challenges also, in addition to the opportunities. Okay, that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And yeah, we'll see you on Friday. Sorry. See you on Friday, guys. Have a good week. Bye.
See you. Bye bye.
Thanks, bye.